Marcus Chin stood in the marble-floored foyer of the $12 million estate, his custom Brioni suit as impeccable as his resume. At 42, he'd built a tech empire from the ground up, revolutionizing artificial intelligence and earning himself a spot on Forbes' list of self-made billionaires. Behind him, his chief of security, David Torres, maintained a discreet distance while conducting his usual property assessment. Sarah Wong, Marcus's VP of Operations, was taking notes on her tablet, her sharp eyes catching every detail of what was quickly becoming an all-too-familiar scene. "I believe there's been some misunderstanding," Patricia Whitman, the real estate agent, said, her manicured hand clutching her designer handbag just a little tighter. She shot a nervous glance at her colleague, Bradley Thompson, who had mysteriously appeared from the back of the house moments after their arrival. "This property is rather exclusive. The Homeowners Association has certain standards." Marcus felt the familiar weight settle in his chest, that mixture of exhaustion, anger, and resignation he'd carried since his days as the only black kid in his private school's gifted program. He'd naively thought that building a multi-billion-dollar company would finally shield him from moments like these. But here he was, watching another white person try to find polite ways to say what they really meant. Standards? Marcus's voice remained perfectly steady, even as he noticed Patricia position herself between him and the grand staircase, as if he might bolt up it and somehow taint the pristine white carpeting with his mere presence. "I'd love to hear more about these standards, Ms. Whitman. Please, be specific." Bradley stepped forward, his cologne arriving before he did. "What my colleague means is that this community has a very particular, cultural fit. We're simply looking out for everyone's best interests." His smile was practiced, the kind that never reached his eyes that kept darting to the Patek Philippe watch on Marcus's wrist, clearly wrestling with the contradiction before him. Sarah cleared her throat softly, her tablet now recording every word. It was a protocol they'd implemented after the third such misunderstanding this month. Marcus could feel her tension radiating across the room. She'd been with him since the early startup days, had seen him build everything from nothing, and these moments infuriated her more than they did him. "Cultural fit?" Marcus repeated, adjusting his cufflinks, a nervous habit from his coding days that he'd turned into a power move. "That's fascinating. Because I've already spoken with Mr. Harrison next door, lovely man, we serve on the board of the Metropolitan Museum together. He seemed quite excited about the possibility of having a tech innovation hub so close to his home." Patricia's face blanched slightly at the name drop, while Bradley's smile flickered. They hadn't expected him to have connections in the neighborhood. Marcus could practically see the mental gymnastics taking place behind their eyes, the desperate recalculation of their assumptions colliding with the reality of who he was and who he knew. Just then, a sleek Tesla pulled up in the circular driveway, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. A distinguished-looking man in his 60s emerged, waving enthusiastically. "Marcus. I thought that was your car out front." Robert Harrison's booming voice carried through the door. "I was just telling Elizabeth we should have you over for dinner soon. That AI education initiative you mentioned at the last board meeting has her absolutely fascinated." The new arrival sent a ripple of chaos through the room. Patricia's handbag nearly slipped from her grip, while Bradley suddenly found the ceiling molding absolutely fascinating. Sarah's tablet pen barely contained her smirk, and even David allowed himself a small smile. Marcus maintained his composed exterior, but internally, he was calculating his next move. This wasn't just about buying a house anymore, it was about addressing a systemic problem that his wealth and status had exposed rather than eliminated. The question was, how to handle it in a way that would create lasting change rather than just temporary discomfort for two clearly biased real estate agents. As Robert Harrison reached for the doorbell, Marcus Chen, the boy who'd once been told he didn't belong in advanced math class, the man who'd revolutionized AI despite countless investors' initial skepticism, made his decision. What happened next would make headlines, but not for the reasons anyone in that marble foyer might have expected. Robert Harrison's entrance transformed the foyer's atmosphere like a sudden change in air pressure. As he strode in, his presence seemed to physically push Patricia and Bradley to the margins of the room. The real estate agent's earlier confidence crumbled visibly as they watched Harrison warmly clasp Marcus's hand in both of his own. "You should have told me you were coming to view the Reynolds place today," Robert said, his gray eyes twinkling. "Though I suppose I shouldn't be surprised, great minds think alike. Did you know this house has a perfect setup for a private tech lab in the basement? Catherine Reynolds used it as her photography darkroom, but with some updates." He trailed off, noticing the thick tension in the room. "I'm not interrupting anything, am I?" Sarah Wong stepped forward smoothly, her tablet still recording. "Actually, Mr. Harrison, we were just discussing the neighborhood's cultural fit and standards. Perhaps you could shed some light on these requirements, given your position on the HOA board?" Bradley Thompson's face went through several interesting color changes. Patricia Whitman suddenly became very interested in her phone, though Marcus noted her hands were shaking too much to actually type anything. Robert's expression shifted from confusion to understanding to something harder. "Cultural fit," he repeated, his jovial tone acquiring a razor's edge. "That's fascinating. Especially since I personally reviewed Mr. Chen's interest in the property last week with the board. We were thrilled at the prospect of having a tech pioneer join our community. In fact..." "Robert," Marcus interrupted softly, an idea crystallizing in his mind. He'd seen this script play out before. The racist parties would be embarrassed, apologies would be made, and nothing would fundamentally change. But maybe there was a different way to handle this, one that could create lasting impact rather than just momentary discomfort. "Sarah, could you pull up the demographic data from our latest education initiative?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the same calm authority he used in board meetings. As Sarah's fingers flew across her tablet, he turned to Patricia and Bradley, who looked like they wanted to melt into the imported marble beneath their feet. "You've given me an excellent opportunity to address something I've been considering for a while," he continued. "Mr. Harrison, you mentioned the AI education initiative earlier. What you don't know is that we've been looking for a pilot location to launch our newest program, one that specifically addresses discriminatory practices in real estate through AI-driven data analysis and blockchain-verified transaction histories." David Torres, who had maintained his professional silence until now, allowed himself a small smile as he watched understanding dawn on everyone's faces. This wasn't going to be a simple confrontation about discrimination. Marcus Chen was about to turn this moment into something much bigger. Patricia Whitman's hands had stopped shaking, but now her face had gone completely pale. Bradley Thompson looked like he was trying to calculate how quickly he could reach the door. But Marcus wasn't done. Not even close. "Ms. Whitman, Mr. Thompson, would you be interested in being part of the solution? After all, who better to help us understand the problem than those who are, shall we say, intimately familiar with these practices?" The silence that followed Marcus's proposal was deafening. Sarah's tablet projection now floated in the air between them, displaying stark statistics about housing discrimination across the country. The holographic display, a prototype from Chen Industries' latest tech line, gave Patricia and Bradley nowhere to hide from the numbers. I don't understand," Patricia finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you offering us a job?" Marcus stepped closer to the hologram, his finger tracing through the light to highlight specific data points. "Not exactly. I'm offering you a chance to be part of something transformative. You see, this house isn't just going to be my home. It's going to be the headquarters of our new real estate equity division." Robert Harrison let out a low whistle. "That's why you were asking about zoning regulations last week." "Precisely," Marcus nodded, as David Torres quietly positioned himself near the door, not to prevent anyone from leaving, but to remind them they should stay and listen. "Our AI has been analyzing patterns of discriminatory practices in real estate for the past year. The results are illuminating. But data alone doesn't create change. We need insider perspectives." Bradley Thompson had found his voice, though it wavered slightly. "And you want our perspective? After what just happened?" "Especially after what just happened," Marcus replied, his dark eyes intense. "Who better to help dismantle a system than those who know its inner workings?" Unless, of course, you prefer we share our findings about your specific practices with the appropriate authorities? Sarah's tablet chirped, displaying a new set of data, this time showing Patricia and Bradley's transaction histories, complete with suspicious patterns that painted a damning picture. How did you? Bradley started. Blockchain never forgets, Mr. Thompson. Every transaction, every cultural fit rejection, every suspicious property suddenly taken off the market when certain buyers show interest, it's all there. The question is, what do you want your next move to be? The weight of the moment hung in the air like suspended crystal, catching light from every angle and refracting it into possibilities none of them had imagined when they walked into this house today. What happened next would either break new ground or break careers, and the choice lay in the trembling hands of two real estate agents who had never expected their everyday prejudices to put them in such a position. Subscribe now to unlock the next part of this gripping story that explores power, prejudice, and the unexpected ways change can come about. Hit that subscribe button to join us on this journey of transformation and justice. Patricia Whitman's designer handbag slipped from her fingers, hitting the marble floor with a dull thud. The sound seemed to snap Bradley Thompson out of his stunned silence. "This is blackmail," he hissed, though his voice lacked conviction. His eyes kept darting between the damning data hovering in the air and the exits David Torres wasn't actually blocking. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Blackmail? No, Mr. Thompson. This is accountability. There's a difference." He gestured to Sarah, who adjusted the holographic display to show a new set of figures. "These are the estimated losses in property value and generational wealth that discriminatory practices have caused in this county alone. My team calculated it down to the penny." Robert Harrison stepped closer to examine the numbers, his expression darkening. "Good Lord. I knew it was bad, but this." He turned to Patricia and Bradley. "How long has this been going on in our community?" Patricia's perfectly manicured hands were trembling as she reached for her fallen bag. "You don't understand," she whispered. "The pressure from certain homeowners, the unofficial expectations, we were just trying to maintain property values. By devaluing human beings?" Sarah's voice cut through the room like a blade. It was the first time she'd shown any emotion beyond professional detachment. "I helped build this AI system. Do you know what we found? Patterns so consistent they couldn't be coincidence. Algorithms don't lie, Ms. Whitman." Marcus held up a hand, silencing what was surely about to be another protest from Bradley. "Let me be clear about what's happening here. Tomorrow morning, Chin Industries will announce its new real estate equity division. We're going to use AI and blockchain technology to ensure transparency in every real estate transaction in this country. The only question is whether you want to be remembered as part of the problem or part of the solution. And if we refuse?" Bradley's attempt at defiance was undermined by the sweat beading on his forehead. Marcus smiled, but it wasn't a kind expression. "Then the data goes to the Justice Department, the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and every civil rights organization in the country. Your choice." The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone in the room. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the setting sun painted the foyer in shades of amber and shadow, a reminder that time was passing and decisions needed to be made. David Torres's phone buzzed quietly. He glanced at it, then gave Marcus a subtle nod. Right on schedule, news helicopters appeared on the horizon. Chin Industries' press announcement was about to become very public, with or without Patricia and Bradley's cooperation. Robert Harrison looked at his watch, then at the approaching helicopters. "Well," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came from decades of sitting on corporate boards, "I believe it's time for everyone to decide which side of history they want to be on." The rhythmic thrum of helicopter blades grew louder, their shadows dancing across the marble floor like dark prophecies. Bradley Thompson loosened his tie, his earlier bravado evaporating with each passing second. Patricia Whitman had sunk into one of the foyer's elegant chairs, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Time's up," Sarah announced, her tablet displaying a countdown clock. "The press conference begins in exactly 10 minutes. Mr. Chen's PR team is already setting up in the garden." Marcus walked to the window, his reflection overlaying the scene of organized chaos unfolding outside. News vans had joined the helicopters, their satellite dishes rising like mechanical flowers in the circular driveway. A small army of journalists was assembling near a hastily erected podium. "You planned this whole thing," Bradley said, realization dawning on his face. "You knew about our practices before you ever walked in here." "Of course he did," Robert Harrison interjected, an unexpected edge of admiration in his voice. Marcus Chin didn't become a tech billionaire by being unprepared. The question is, did you really think you could maintain these discriminatory practices forever? In the age of big data and artificial intelligence? Patricia suddenly stood up, her designer heels clicking against the marble as she walked to Marcus. "My grandmother," she said, her voice barely audible above the growing commotion outside, "she was a real estate agent too. In the 1960s. She used to tell me stories about how she helped segregate neighborhoods. Said she was protecting communities. I grew up hearing those stories, inheriting those beliefs without questioning them." She paused, tears welling in her eyes. "I became exactly what she was, didn't I?" The room fell silent, save for the mechanical whir of Sarah's holographic display adjusting itself. Marcus turned from the window, studying Patricia's face carefully. "The difference," he said quietly, "is that your grandmother didn't have a chance to change history. You do. Right now." David Torres stepped away from the door, his phone displaying a series of incoming messages. "Sir, the press is asking for confirmation about the rumored revolutionary announcement in real estate equity. They're speculating about everything from blockchain-based property records to AI-driven anti-discrimination systems." "They're not wrong," Marcus smiled, then turned back to Patricia and Bradley. "So, shall we tell them the real story? About how two real estate agents decided to help dismantle the very system they once perpetuated?" Bradley walked over to stand beside Patricia, his face showing the first signs of genuine emotion they'd seen all day. "They'll crucify us," he whispered. "Or canonize you," Sarah countered, her fingers flying over her tablet. "Depends on how the story's told. And right now, you have a chance to help write it." Outside, the crowd had grown. Camera flashes sparked like lightning against the darkening sky. The whole world was waiting to hear what Marcus Chen, the tech billionaire who'd revolutionized artificial intelligence, was about to announce. But first, two people needed to make a choice that would define not just their careers, but their legacy. The next few moments unfolded like scenes from a carefully orchestrated play. Patricia wiped her tears with a monogrammed handkerchief, her shoulders straightening as she made her decision. Bradley's transformation was more subtle, just a slight shift in his stance, but it spoke volumes. "If we do this," Bradley said, his voice steadier than before, "we'll need protection. Other agents, bigger agencies, they'll come after us." Marcus's smile was razor-sharp. "Mr. Thompson, did you think I came here today with just a plan for exposure?" "Sarah, show them Protocol Phoenix." Sarah's tablet projected a new set of holograms, complex organizational charts, security measures, and financial projections. Chen Industries has already established a whistleblower protection program specifically for real estate professionals. Legal protection, financial security, even new identities if necessary. We've been building this infrastructure for months. Months? Patricia's eyes widened. How many others? You're not the first ones we've approached, David confirmed, checking his phone again. But you would be the highest profile converts yet. Your testimony would add significant weight to the announcement. Robert Harrison had been quiet, watching the scene unfold with the calculated interest of a seasoned businessman. Now he stepped forward. "The HOA board meeting last week," he said, turning to Marcus. "When you were asking about commercial zoning exceptions, was never about a tech lab," Marcus finished. "This entire property is being converted into the headquarters for real estate industry reformation. Every room will be dedicated to documenting, analyzing, and prosecuting discriminatory practices. And yes, Robert, we'll need your vote on the board to make it happen." Outside, the crowd had grown larger. The sunset had given way to the harsh glare of professional lighting rigs. The world was waiting, phones and cameras ready to broadcast whatever happened next. Bradley looked at Patricia, years of shared complicity passing between them in a single glance. Then he shocked everyone by laughing, a short, sharp sound filled with equal parts hysteria and relief. "You know what the irony is," he said, loosening his tie completely. "All those years we spent keeping people out of neighborhoods like this one, and now we're about to help tear down the whole system from inside a $12 million mansion." "Poetic justice," Sarah commented dryly, her tablet now displaying a countdown clock. 3 minutes until the press conference begins. Marcus stepped toward Patricia and Bradley, his presence drawing all eyes in the room. "So," he said quietly, "are you ready to help make history? Or would you prefer to become its cautionary tale?" The choice hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of generations of systemic racism and the possibility of redemption. In the garden outside, hundreds of journalists waited to broadcast what they thought would be a simple business announcement. None of them could have guessed that inside this mansion's marble foyer, 2 real estate agents were about to make a decision that would send shockwaves through the entire industry. The garden had been transformed into a media circus. Floodlights carved harsh shadows across the manicured lawns, and the air buzzed with the electric anticipation of hundreds of journalists who knew they were about to witness something significant, they just didn't know what. Marcus Chin stood behind the podium, the perfect picture of corporate success. To his left, Sarah managed the presentation screens with practiced precision. To his right, David maintained his vigilant watch. But it was the presence of Patricia Whitman and Bradley Thompson, standing slightly behind Marcus, that caught the media's attention. Their faces were pale but determined, like people walking willingly into their own execution. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice carrying easily across the crowded garden, "today marks the beginning of a new era in real estate." He paused, letting the cameras catch his expression. "For too long, we've allowed discrimination to hide behind coded language and unofficial policies. Today, that changes." The holographic displays activated, floating above the crowd. Raw data scrolled past, thousands of transactions, each tagged with damning patterns of discrimination. The journalists' cameras clicked frantically. Chin Industries has spent the past year developing an AI system that tracks and analyzes real estate transactions across the country. The results are enlightening. Marcus gestured to the displays, where red flags highlighted suspicious patterns. But numbers alone don't tell the whole story. For that, I'll turn the microphone over to 2 industry insiders who have chosen to take a stand. Patricia stepped forward first, her hands trembling but her voice clear. "My name is Patricia Whitman. For 15 years, I've been a top-producing real estate agent in this community. And for 15 years, I've been part of a system designed to keep certain people out of certain neighborhoods." The garden erupted in shocked murmurs. Camera flashes intensified. Bradley moved to stand beside her, his face set in grim determination. "I'm Bradley Thompson," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of his decision. "And what my colleague is about to tell you will implicate many powerful people and organizations. But it needs to be said." As Patricia began detailing specific instances of discrimination, names, dates, coded phrases used to signal unwanted buyers, Sarah's displays updated in real time, correlating each example with data patterns that proved it wasn't isolated but systemic. From the back of the crowd, angry shouts erupted. Several real estate agents who had arrived to witness what they thought would be a routine business announcement were now watching their careers implode in real time. Security personnel moved smoothly to contain potential disruptions. Robert Harrison, watching from the sidelines, pulled out his phone and began making calls. As the head of the HOA board, he had his own part to play in this unfolding drama. But it was Marcus who held the room's attention as he stepped back to the microphone. "What you're witnessing isn't just a confession or an exposé. It's the launch of the real estate equity division of Chin Industries. Our AI system isn't just documenting discrimination, it's going to prevent it. Every real estate transaction in this country will be monitored, analyzed, and scored for fairness. Every agent, every agency, every mortgage company will be held accountable. The garden exploded into chaos as reporters shouted questions and protesters tried to rush the stage. But through it all, Patricia and Bradley stood their ground, their faces showing the strange mix of terror and relief that comes with finally choosing the right side of history. The aftermath of the press conference erupted like a controlled demolition. As security personnel formed a protective barrier around the podium, phones across the garden lit up with breaking news alerts. #ChenExpose was already trending nationwide, and video clips of Patricia's confession were spreading across social media like wildfire. "Mr. Chen." A reporter's voice cut through the chaos. "Is it true that your AI system has already identified over 10,000 instances of potential discrimination in the last year alone?" Before Marcus could respond, an enraged voice boomed from the crowd. "This is slander." A tall man in an expensive suit pushed his way forward, James Whitworth III, CEO of Premier Realty, one of the largest agencies in the state. "You can't prove intent with an algorithm." Marcus's smile remained unchanged as Sarah smoothly adjusted the holographic display. "Actually, Mr. Whitworth, we can. Would you like to explain these text messages from your company's internal communication system?" The display showed a series of messages that made several reporters gasp audibly. Whitworth's face turned purple. "You hacked our servers. This is illegal." "Blockchain doesn't lie," Sarah replied calmly. "Every digital communication leaves a trace. Your own employees provided these records voluntarily through our whistleblower program. Speaking of which..." She pressed a button on her tablet, and the display shifted to show a map dotted with hundreds of glowing points. Each of these lights represents an industry insider who's already agreed to testify. Bradley stepped forward, his voice stronger now. "James, it's over. The old ways are done. Either adapt or go down with the ship." The irony of Bradley Thompson, who less than an hour ago had been defending those very old ways, wasn't lost on anyone. From the back of the crowd, Robert Harrison was ending a phone call with a satisfied smile. He caught Marcus's eye and gave a subtle nod. The HOA board had convened an emergency session and voted unanimously to support Chen Industries' initiative. The symbolic significance of one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods endorsing this change wasn't lost on the reporters, who immediately began shouting new questions. But it was Patricia who commanded attention next, her voice cutting through the noise with unexpected authority. "I received this text 10 minutes ago from my former mentor." She held up her phone, and Sarah quickly captured and displayed the message, "You're not just finished in this industry. You're finished in this city." The crowd fell silent as Patricia continued, "This is exactly why we needed someone like Marcus Chen, someone with the resources and technology to protect those who want to come forward. The threats and intimidation that kept this system in place for so long won't work anymore. The truth is going to come out, name by name, transaction by transaction." As the sun set completely behind the city's skyline, the garden had transformed into something resembling a war room. News crews were broadcasting live from every corner, while social media executives were desperately trying to control the flood of leaked documents that Patricia and Bradley's confession had triggered. Other real estate agents across the country, sensing the changing tide, had begun coming forward with their own stories. James Whitworth III hadn't left. Instead, he stood at the edge of the crowd, furiously typing on his phone while his face grew increasingly pale. Sarah's AI system was updating in real time, correlating each new confession with existing data patterns, creating an ever-expanding web of evidence that was impossible to deny. "Sir," David approached Marcus discreetly, "we're receiving calls from the Justice Department, the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and 3 state attorneys general. They're requesting immediate access to our data." Marcus nodded, unsurprised. "Give them everything." "Sarah, initiate Protocol Sunshine." Sarah's fingers flew across her tablet, and suddenly every screen in the garden lit up with new information. "Protocol Sunshine activated," she announced. "All data is now being live-streamed to government agencies and certified media outlets simultaneously." Complete transparency in real time. The garden erupted again as reporters realized what this meant. Not only was Chen Industries exposing decades of discriminatory practices, but they were also making it impossible for anyone to cover it up. The evidence was now spreading too fast, too wide, to be contained. "You've destroyed everything." Whitworth finally snapped, his composed exterior cracking completely. He lunged forward, pushing past the security line, his hands reaching for Marcus's collar. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" But before security could react, something unexpected happened. Patricia stepped between them, her small frame somehow filling the space with newfound authority. "He's fixed what we broke, James. What we've all been breaking for generations." Bradley moved to stand beside her, and they were quickly joined by other real estate agents from the crowd, ones who had been silent until now. The physical confrontation transformed into something more powerful, a visible shift in allegiance, happening in real time before hundreds of cameras. Marcus watched it unfold with the same calm smile he'd worn all day, but his eyes held a deeper emotion. He thought of his parents, who'd been turned away from neighborhoods like this one decades ago. He thought of all the families who'd been told certain communities weren't for their kind. And he thought of the conversation he'd had with his AI development team a year ago, when they discovered they could use technology to prove what everyone had known but no one could demonstrate. Robert Harrison's voice cut through his reflection. "Marcus, you need to see this." He held up his tablet, showing a live feed of the stock market. Real estate companies across the country were experiencing unprecedented volatility as investors tried to predict which ones would survive the coming storm. "Mr. Chen," a reporter called out, "your company's stock has jumped 30% since the announcement. Comments?" Marcus stepped back to the podium, his voice carrying across the now silent garden. "This was never about the stock market. This is about something my father told me when I was young. He said, 'Son, sometimes you have to buy the house to change the rules.' Well, we didn't just buy a house. We're changing the entire game." 1 month later, Marcus Chen stood in the same marble-floored foyer where it had all begun. The house had been transformed into the headquarters of the Real Estate Equity Division, its rooms now filled with analysts, civil rights attorneys, and AI specialists working around the clock. Patricia and Bradley had their own offices down the hall, where they coordinated with other whistleblowers across the country. "The latest numbers are in," Sarah announced, her tablet displaying a holographic chart. "Over 3,000 real estate agents have joined the program. Discriminatory practices are down 78% in participating agencies. The blockchain verification system has processed more than 1 million transactions." "And Whitworth?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. "Resigned this morning," David confirmed. "Along with 12 other major agency CEOs. The Justice Department's investigation is expanding daily." Robert Harrison entered through the front door, looking pleased. "The National Association of Realtors just announced mandatory AI fairness screening for all member agencies. They're using our system, Marcus. It's becoming the industry standard." Marcus walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, remembering that first confrontation. Patricia and Bradley's initial bias, their transformation, and the cascade of changes that followed. The mansion's reflection showed a different scene now, people of all backgrounds working together, their faces illuminated by screens showing real-time data on housing equity. Mr. Chen, a young black analyst, called from her workstation. "You should see this." She projected a new visualization onto the main screen, a map showing housing application approval rates across the country. The previously stark racial disparities were beginning to blur, the lines of segregation slowly fading. "It's working," Patricia said softly, entering the foyer with a stack of new whistleblower statements. "Actually working. My grandmother." She paused, emotion catching in her throat. She would have never believed this was possible. Marcus turned to face his team, his expression both serious and hopeful. "This is just the beginning. Real change doesn't happen in a month, or a year. But for the first time, we have the tools, the technology, and most importantly, the people willing to make it happen." He walked to his office, the same room where Patricia had once tried to deny him a viewing. On his desk sat a framed article, "Tech Billionaire Transforms Real Estate Industry, How One Man's Experience with Discrimination Led to Systemic Change." But it wasn't the headline that mattered to him. It was the small note from a young family that had just bought their dream home in a neighborhood that would have been closed to them just months ago. It read simply, "Thank you for making them see us as people, not statistics." Marcus smiled, thinking of his father's words again. Sometimes you had to buy the house to change the rules. But it turned out that changing the rules wasn't enough. You had to change hearts and minds too. And sometimes, the most powerful way to fight discrimination wasn't through confrontation, but through transformation, giving people the chance to become better than their prejudices. The system wasn't perfect yet, but it was evolving. And in that evolution lay the hope for a future where the only thing that determined someone's home was their humanity, not their race. This story shows us that real change requires more than just exposing injustice. It needs innovation, courage, and the willingness to give people a chance at redemption. If this story touched your heart and made you think about the power of transformation, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button to support stories that tackle real issues. Share your thoughts in the comments below. How would you use technology to fight discrimination? Share this story with someone who needs to read it today. Together, we can write a new chapter in the fight against discrimination. Your engagement helps spread this important message.